Just a second. We are live.
Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Exam Schools Admissions Task Force. Because this is a remote session, I will ask Ms. Parvex to please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Contampasis. Mr. Acevedo is going to be late. Ms. Aguirre,
Present.
Mr. Kreger. Mr. Kreger,
Fine, present.
thank you. Dr. Freeman Wisdom, Ms. Grassa,
Present.
Ms. Lam,
Present.
Ms. Nagasawa,
Present.
Ms. Gerrit, Ms. Tang,
Present.
Ms. Wade, Ms. Sullivan,
Oops, sorry. Can't get to my present.
thank you. And I see that Ms. Gerrit is here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Contampasis and Ms. Sullivan.
Present. We are pleased to be offering live simultaneous interpretation this evening in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cape Verdean, Portuguese, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Somali, Arabic, and American Sign Language. After I finish introducing the interpreters, we will activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. Click the icon to select your language preference. Our Spanish interpreter this evening is Randolph Dominguez. Mr. Dominguez, will you please introduce yourself?
Hello, good evening, Mr. Contampasis. Good evening, everybody in this panel. Muy buenas noches, damas y caballeros. Mi nombre es Randolph Domínguez. Voy a ser su intérprete simultáneo de esta noche. Para accesar el idioma español, por favor, buscar en la parte inferior de su pantalla un globo terráqueo, el cual, si ustedes pulsan, pueden seleccionar el idioma español. Si están utilizando un celular, pueden, por favor, pulsar los tres puntos en la mano superior derecha de su pantalla y allí ustedes podrán seleccionar el idioma español. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Our Cape Verdean interpreter this evening is Josanne Lopes. Will you please give the Zoom instructions in Cape Verdean?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Contampasis. Hello, my name is Josiane. Olá, meu nome é Josiane. Saber ser meus intérpretes de crioulo para que reunião ali, para ter acesso à interpretação simultânea, nos clica no ícone de globo na parte inferior de nosso ecrã e nos seleciona Cabo Verdeano. Se você usa o telemóvel, nos seleciona três pontinhos na parte superior de nosso ecrã. Obrigada. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Portuguese interpreter this evening is Christiane Leitman. Will you please give the Zoom instructions in Portuguese?
Olá, boa noite. Meu nome é Cristiane, eu sou intérprete de português brasileiro. Se você precisa de interpretação para essa reunião, por favor, clique no globo na parte inferior da tela e escolha o canal português para ouvir essa reunião. Se você estiver usando um telefone celular, no canto direito superior, você vai ver três pontinhos, você pode clicar lá para ter acesso ao canal português dessa reunião. Obrigada.
Thank you. Our Vietnamese interpreter is Nguyen Tru. Will you please give the instructions in Vietnamese?
Good afternoon. My name is Nguyen Triệu. I would be the Vietnamese interpreter for the meeting today. Xin chào quý anh chị. Tôi là phiên dịch người Việt Nam. Nếu mà anh chị cần ngôn ngữ tiếng Việt, xin bấm vào tiếng Việt và vào quả cầu và tôi sẽ cung cấp thông dịch liên tục cho các anh chị. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Cantonese interpreter is Anna Say. Please give the Zoom instructions in Cantonese.
Thank you，大家好，我係阿能，我係你今日嘅廣東話同傳翻譯。咁你見到下面有個熒光屏，有個地球儀，咁你就揀 Chinese 就會成功進入咗廣東話嘅翻譯頻道。如果你用手機嘅話咧，麻煩你就點嗰3個點之後去選擇更多，再去揀 Chinese 就會成功咁進入咗廣東話翻譯頻道噶啦。多謝大家，一陣見。Thank you。
Thank you. Our Mandarin interpreter is Terry Yin.
Thank
Please
you.
give the- Go right ahead, sir.
Thank you. 大家好，我的名叫 Terry， 我是你们的普通话翻译。待会儿呢，你就可以在这个屏幕下方看到一个地球仪的图标，选择这个地球仪的图标，然后再选择 Mandarin， 你就可以听到普通话的翻译了。如果你们是需要广东话呢，就可以选 Cantonese。如果你是用手机或者是用 iPad 上的话呢，你就可以点着屏幕下方的3个点。你再点这个语言的选项，你也可以进入到这个 Mandarin， 也就是普通话的翻译。好，谢谢大家 ，Thank you。
Thank you. Our Haitian Creole interpreter is Sergio Saint-Hilaire. Please give the Zoom instructions in Haitian Creole.
Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Sergio Saint-Hilaire, Haitian Creole interpreter. C'est un plaisir pour nous aujourd'hui encore pour nous traduire pour et que nous demandons soit que nous dans channel français ou à cliquer en bas écran là ou à joindre un globe ou à cliquer ou à cabantuer. Pas oublier nous là pour nous travailler avant pour nous traduire tout ce qu'on a pour besoin de dire et c'est avec plaisir qu'on fait ça. Nous demandons pour entrer dans la conversation et pour chercher à comprendre tout ça, dire tout ce qu'on a besoin. Merci.
Thank you. Our Arabic interpreter is Ahmed Al-Rubai. Please give the instructions in Arabic.
Hello everyone, my name is Ahmed Rubai. I will be the Arabic interpreter today. مرحبا، أنا اسمي أحمد الربيعي، أنا مترجم اللغة العربية لهذا اليوم. بإمكانكم الاستماع إلى الترجمة الآنية من خلال الذهاب إلى أسفل الشاشة. ستشاهدون علامة الكرة الأرضية. اضغط على هذه العلامة ستظهر لك الاختيارات بالنسبة إلى اللغة العربية اللغات. اضغط على اللغة العربية وستتمكن عندها من الاستماع إلى الترجمة باللغة العربية. شكرا جزيلا. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Our Somali interpreter this evening is Fatima Hassan. Please give the instructions in Somali.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Fatima Hassan. I'm a Somali interpreter. galab wanaagsan, magacayga waa Faadimo Xasan. Waxaan idinku ahay qofkii idin turjumi lahaa maantayto luqadda Soomaaliga. Qofkii u baahan anaa u diyaara inaan u turjumo. Waxaad taabanaysaa meesha shishada qaybteeda hoose oo ku taala globalka ama qaaradda Soomaali ayaa ka dooranaysaa, kadibna anaa idinkugu diyaara. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have American Sign Language interpreters this evening, Erin Foley and Celia Michaud. Thank you all for assisting us this evening. We will now activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. I'd like to remind everyone to speak at a slower pace to assist all of our interpreters. We'll move on now to the approval of minutes from the May 11th, 2021 meeting, which you all have received in advance. At this time, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented. May I have a motion to accept?
For clarification, which set of minutes is this?
May 11th.
So moved.
May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Hearing none, Ms. Parvex, please call the roll.
Thank you. Ms. Aguirre,
Yes.
Mr. Kreger,
Yes.
Dr. Freeman Wisdom, Ms. Grassa,
Yes.
Ms. Lam,
Yes.
Ms. Nagasawa,
Yes.
Ms. Garrett,
Yes.
Dr. Tang,
Yes.
Ms. Waite,
Yes.
Ms. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mr. Contampassis,
Yes.
and I see Mr. Acevedo is here.
Pardon me for joining late. I imagine we're approving the minutes.
Yes,
saying
sir.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on, the next item on the agenda is a review of data from the BPS exam school admission results for school year 2021, 2022, and other data. Before we begin that, I'd ask Ms. Sullivan if she has anything she would like to offer.
Yes, actually, I just want to make sure I know that I believe it was the May 4th minutes to which Dr. Tung had requested modifications, which we voted on at, I believe, the last meeting. I just want to make sure that that has been addressed, Dr. Tung, to your satisfaction. Just
Yes, Ms. Parvex and I got the language into the revised minutes.
excellent, thank you. That was the only outstanding question I had. Thank you.
Okay. I know that both Ms. Roberts and Ms. Hogan may have some additional information, or you may, members of the task force, have some questions for either one of them or both regarding some of the information that we have received previously. So let's start there based on the materials that were offered last Friday. Are there any members who have additional questions that they may wish to raise with either Ms. Hogan or Ms. Roberts? Okay. Ms. Roberts,
Yes,
do
sir.
we have additional information that you wish to share with the task force?
We do, and my colleague, Ms. Hogan, is going to share the slides, and we'll both be presenting today. So good to see you all again this evening. Just gonna start, if you can advance to the next slide, by sharing some quick responses to the questions, some of the questions that were asked. One of the questions that came up is whether we had disaggregated data for non-public schools. We did check with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and found that they only have aggregated enrollment data. So when you receive the slides, you will also receive the link to that information. We received a request for the Opportunity Index. There is a table on the right that shares which indicators we use at each grade level, so elementary, middle, and high. And then we also will have a link to the district website, which has additional information, and we'll be able to share a spreadsheet that has a lot more data in terms of the OI score and the connection to, I believe, MCAS and all the other factors that are in it that we were asked for last week. And then lastly, there were questions about whether there will be separate classrooms in the exam schools. So I did follow up with our Office of Special Education. And essentially, they did acknowledge that they are still working with our school leaders and will be working with families to ensure that their needs will be met. So the schools will be staffed to provide the services included in students' individual education plans. In the case that a substantially separate classroom is needed, then that would be provided. But this is obviously a conversation that happens in partnership with the family, student, and work that happens with the school as well. So I believe we can advance to the next slide, and Ms. Hogan will talk a little bit about census tracts.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. There were a few questions around sort of how big a census tract is and how many people are generally included in a census tract. So this information, there's 2 links at the bottom of the page where all of this information comes from, but census tracts average around 4,000 inhabitants with at least 1,200 people in the population, but no more than 8,000. They do review the census tract areas every 10 years, and they may split census tracts into 2 or merge smaller tracts together as population changes. But the goal is for them to be relatively permanent over time. And there was also a question around when the 2020 census data would be available. So the 5-year American Community Survey estimates from 2016 to 2020 are scheduled to be released on December 9th of 2021. So not until the very end of this calendar year. We had some additional requests for data on this year's invitation process. So this slide shows the percentage of invitations by exam school, by student group for 7th grade. So the first group is students with disabilities, and we will revise these labels so we're not using acronyms. I apologize for that. Students with disabilities, English learners, economically disadvantaged students, and the homeless DCF category. Pause and let you look at this. The next slide is going to be the same thing, but for 9th grade. Oh, Dr. Tung, I see your hand raised.
Just trying to figure out, a student can be more than one of these categories. So we're not trying to add up to 100 or anything like that, right? And they can also be none of these categories.
Correct. So for instance, if I'm looking at this bar that says 8% here, that would be 8% of the 9th grade invitations to BLA for school year 2021 were to students who are considered English learners.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Our next 2 slides focus on zip codes. There was a question around the intersection of economically disadvantaged or socioeconomic status and zip code. So this table shows you the percent of the invitations in each zip code that were sent to economically disadvantaged students. There is a 2-year comparison, last year to this year. So for example, if I look at 02119 in Roxbury, there were 27 invitations last year. 56% went to economically disadvantaged students. There were 50 this year, and 68% went to economically disadvantaged students. And this is for 7th grade.
You just need to change the top row header for 21, 22.
Oh, thank you. Ms. Garrett?
Thanks. And just a point of clarification. So Chinatown, for example, which last year had amongst the highest percentage of economically disadvantaged invitees, this year has too few to calculate that percentage, or you don't share the percentage if it's fewer than 10?
Correct. We don't, to try and protect student privacy, when we are disaggregating by multiple characteristics. So in this case, zip code and economically disadvantaged, and we do suppress more information. So I believe there is a slide in here that shows, I believe it's 7 invitations this year to Chinatown, but we're suppressing the percentage of students who are economically disadvantaged.
Thanks.
The next slide has the same year typo that Dr. Tung pointed out, so we will fix that, but is the same data for 9th grade. I think, Ms. Roberts, am I passing it back to you?
Yes, ma'am. So we'll now start to look at invitations by zip code and school type. So if you look to the left column, the far left, it has the zip code and then a neighborhood. What we did is broke down percentage-wise the percent of invitations by their current school type. So for example, in 02111, the China neighborhood for last school year, the 24 invitees, 96% of those were BPS students at the time of application. None were coming from charter, and then 4% were coming from either private parochial or METCO. And again, as Ms. Hogan just noted, if they had less than 10 invitees for this school year, we will also correct the school year there to be 21, 22. Then you will not have the percentages. So, but if we skip down to 02115 along with Fenway, you'll see similarly 64% of the invitees last year were BPS, 36% private parochial and METCO. For this year, 50% were BPS, and then 50% were private parochial or METCO. So just give you a minute to look at the table. think we might be good to move on, Ms. Hogan. So this slide is the same information for the 9th grade. Just give you a couple of minutes to take a look at that, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, Ms. Hogan, I think might be ready. Okay, thank you. So you all also asked for information about the students' grade point average, or GPA, and what that looked like by neighborhood in terms of the GPA range. So from an A+ to below, you'll see starting, we'll just use the first one, which is the Longwood Fenway area, 02115. The N is the number of students. There are 10 students. As you go across, there were none who had a B-, none with a B, and you can see the range, the GPA range underneath, and then 20% with a B+, 50% with the A-, 30% with an A, and none with the A+. You also see the average GPA, and I see Ms. Aguirre's hands. So
Yeah, I'm
take
sorry,
question.
I don't see Chinatown here.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan. I think we need to.
This is again, zip codes with less than 10 invitations aren't included.
Oh, thank you.
Okay,
Good
thank
help.
you.
So how many zip codes have less than 10 invitations?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I believe it's 5 or 6.
Could we get that listing and then figure out how we can get data, even if we need to, how can we get the listing of those zip codes so that we can figure out how we can get to that data? I understand the concern with privacy, but want to try to figure out how we can still get a sense of what that data looks like. So it'd be helpful to know which zip codes we're talking about.
Yep. I know 02108, which is one of the downtown zip codes, and 02109 are also included in that group.
What's 02109?
It's another downtown zip code. Believe it's the financial district area.
So that would be helpful because again, if we can get the listing of the zip codes with the neighborhoods, we may be able to combine, like, so if we've got like 3 downtown zip codes, you know, looking at them in the aggregate might be helpful for us. So
sure,
we can, yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And move to the next slide, Ms. Hogan. Okay, this is again, same information for grade 9, and we will have to do the same thing requested for our 9th grade GPA distribution. I think we can just scanning to see if we can move. I think we can move forward. Always feel free to tell me to slow down if you all need to. So we were asked also if there were any BPS schools for which we had applicants that did not receive, and where there were no invitations extended. So where you may have students from the school who applied, but none of them received an invitation. We did combine, so I think to Ms. Sullivan's earlier point, this may be one way we could do it. We combined the schools and didn't provide the data because of the small numbers. So for 7th grade, there are 4 schools that had applicants, 13 applicants across those 4 schools, none receiving an invitation, apologies. And then for grade 9, there were 2 BPS schools with 6 applicants, none of whom received an invitation. We also have a note that the McKinley had no applications for grade 7 or 9, and the Horace Mann had no applicants for grade 9. Next slide, please, Ms. Hogan. We were also asked for to share the data in terms of invitees and the home language spoken. So we do, when we do home language for BPS, we do the parent home language preference. So you'll see the difference between last school year 2021, this 2022, by 7th grade and 9th grade. You will see that the overwhelming majority for both school years across 7th and 9th grade are families whose parent preference or home language preference is English. And you can see the other language preferences for this school year, next school year, last school year, sorry, Spanish being among the largest in terms of home language. So if I can move forward. Oh, okay.
That's the last new slide.
Thank you. So we also have retained all the slides in case any questions come up about prior data shared as well. Happy to take any questions that you might have.
I thought I had requested a slide because some schools were missing on the increase or decrease of number of acceptances.
Those edits were made and shared in the slides that Ms. Parvex shared. I'm happy to pull it up if you would like to see it.
Copy. Nope, I didn't realize they were in there. My bad. Thank you.
I do not see any hands raised at this time. Are there questions? Ms. Garrett.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Ms. Hogan or Ms. Roberts can speak to kind of the general conclusion or kind of what the heading would be on the GPA slides by zip code. I think Dr. Tung talked about if there could be a headline at the top to translate, just so to kind of line up with what some of our individual interpretations may be. I took the slide to suggest that the average GPA by zip code was fairly significant. I know it's not outlined by school, but I imagine it could be exacerbated. I think that's something that we've heard from families about. So just wondering from a data analysis perspective, if you have kind of a summary of what that data means.
I will start and I will see if Ms. Hogan would like to add to that.
Can you put the slide up as you're speaking to it? Do you mind? Again, that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hogan's the data expert, so I will always yield to her. I think one of the headlines here is that in general, you'll note that most GPAs are B+ or higher. If you think about the average for the neighborhoods, most of them are between a B+ and an A-. And the lowest average in terms of neighborhood is in the B+ zone. So I think the lowest average is actually our students who are homeless or in DCF custody. That average there is in the B+ zone. So as we think about some of the questions about whether students are prepared, I think there is some information there that we can glean about this. You'll see that the lowest overall here is a B-, where 2% the applicant pool, invitee pool, and Mattapan had a B minus. But I would say that's the headline. I don't know, Ms. Hogan, if you want to add anything for 7th grade, and I see we also have some hands raised.
I think that was a pretty good summary. I will add, I have heard some anecdotes that there are A+ students who did not get an invitation, and just want to clarify that all students with a perfect GPA at 12 did receive an invitation. So just want to make sure that that is clear. All students with a 12 GPA received an invitation to an exam school. Dr.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Ms. Hogan. Dr. Tung?
My questions have to do with previously raised requests. One is.
So I'm sorry, Dr. Tung, can we just look at the 9th grade before, do you mind? Can we just close out this question?
Of course.
Thank you, sorry.
Ms. Hogan, feel free to hop in here. I think similarly, actually, you'll see the average GPA here again across neighborhoods, solidly within a B+ to an A- range on across all of the zip codes. And you'll have in West Roxbury, 25% of those invited had a B average. And then I think that's, and 7% in Mattapan had a B average.
And it's a 10 point, I just want to make sure. So this actually says a 10.3 is the average GPA. So that would be an A-, correct?
Yes, for South End, for example, an 02118.
So I'm looking at the bottom row.
At the bottom, yes,
total.
Harry, yes, that would be an A-.
Yeah. Okay.
And just to close this out, is another way to also look at this, if you go back to the 7th grade slide, because it might be more numerically significant, to look at zip codes where there is a 0% in specific columns. For instance, Charlestown, with no students earning less than an A, example, might be another way to see if there is alignment between maybe specific neighborhoods of families who've articulated some concerns.
Thank you, Ms. Garrett.
I know, Dr. Tung, your question is on a different subject. Mr. Acevedo, is your question on this subject or a different?
It is on this subject.
Great.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. I guess my question here is, and also my apologies if this has been already answered in the collection of these slides, and it's great that we have the 7th grade grade distribution up to now as well. Is there any evidence of a drop in the average GPA distribution, whether across the zip codes or really, more tellingly, across the board between our exam schools with this year's student body compared to the previous year where we administered the ISEE exam? And that could come either from either Monica, or it could also I'd be curious also to hear anecdotally from Ms. Garrett.
I'm going to see if Ms. Hogan wants to tackle that question, and then certainly Ms. Garrett.
So because the GPAs represent different time periods, it's hard to make that comparison. So as a reminder, in the previous admissions process, the GPA represented the spring of your either 5th or 7th grade year and the first 2 terms of your 6th or 8th grade year, depending on your grade level. And for this year's process, we looked at the first 2 terms of your 5th or 7th grade year. So there are some, it's a different number of grades included in different time of year. And then additionally, the overall GPA was not rounded this year to an integer. So whereas in previous years, student GPAs were rounded to the nearest whole number. So it is a little hard to make that direct year-to-year comparison because of that. But I'm happy to take that question back, and Ms. Roberts and I can think about how to try and answer that in a meaningful way.
And Mr. Acevedo, I'm not familiar with the GPA average for all 3 exam schools, so it would be difficult. And Ms. Hogan brings up some good points about the differentiation in the how the GPAs were used in the past. I think that in the past it was not as much the sole criteria. So students with the equal weighting of test and GPA could have different GPAs that could be mitigated or compensated for with the assessment score. So it would be a difficult comparison. But to speak to Ms. Roberts' earlier point, we certainly these honor roll grades are certainly aligned with classes that we've had, and we absolutely anticipate these students will thrive with the grades that they have.
Mr. Contenpasis, do you have a question on this subject or is it a new subject?
No, on this subject. I'm just following up with what Ms. Hogan mentioned. Do we know why was the decision made not to round off where it had been done in the past, I would assume, every year? Was that a decision made by the school committee, or was that a decision made internally? And if so, why?
That's a good question. Given Ms. Garrett noted that grades were the only factor included this year, to try and ensure differentiation between student GPAs, the decision was made to not round the overall GPA. So to differentiate between an 11.5 and an 11.67, for instance.
So in other words, what you did is you used the real number as opposed to rounding off.
Yes, it did. It was not rounded, correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Lum, and then I am going to go to Dr. Tung.
I just wanted to comment that I vaguely recall the working group decided not to round because we wanted to mitigate ties. I thought, but I could be recalling incorrectly.
No, that's actually a really,
Yeah. Yep.
yes, yep. Great memory. Like, that's right. Yeah, great. Thank you. Dr. Tung, thank you for your patience.
Well, I actually do have one question on the zip code and GPA slides, but you don't have to put it back up. It's just that just making sure they're all invites, so including students from private and parochial schools. Correct?
Yes, all students invited, correct.
And then the three questions I have from previous meetings is, do we have a response yet from NWEA from our questions on May 5th? And then my second question is, do we have a BPS, a Boston Public Schools definition of rigor? And third, do we have the zip code slides from May 14th in Excel with all the columns added?
I'll start with your last question. There is an Excel workbook that should be coming your way either later tonight or in the morning. That includes the zip code tables, as well as the school by school disaggregated MCAS data and school OI scores. So that is, Ms. Roberts and I were finishing making sure the labels were clear and should be sending that over. Ms. Parvex, I don't know if you have received a response yet from NWEA.
No, I haven't.
Okay, we can follow up to see what the status of that is. And then I think Ms. Roberts.
So actually, I'm sorry, Ms. Hogan, on that question, I think it's now been, I think the date of that meeting was the 4th, if my memory, yeah, it was a Tuesday. So we're at the 2-week mark. Could you please, I'm not sure who is communicating with NWEA?
It's a mix of both me and Ms. Parvex.
Okay. So on your next communication to them, Ms. Hogan, could you please copy both me and Mr. Contampasas?
Yes.
And express really the urgency of receiving a response to those questions that Dr. Tung posed.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I can take the next question. So I do have probably more information than you might have hoped for, but the district's essentials for instructional equity is what guides our work for ensuring academic rigor. And as we talk about rigor, we talk about academically, intellectually, and personally challenging, as well as culturally and linguistically sustaining instruction, learning experiences, coursework, and educational expectations. That said, I will say that there is some work happening between our Office of Academics and our Chief of Schools as to really look at our definition of rigor. And so there will likely be some work coming out on that. So I do want to state that as well.
Wait, so I didn't catch all that? Is
Yeah.
there a slide?
I can throw it in a slide and Miss, hold on. Miss Hogan can probably pop it up for me. Miss Hogan, I'm just gonna add a slide right back. Okay, Ms. Hogan, I think I might have to make it a little bit bigger, but it is. Ms. Hogan, it's slide 14 now. Oh, you're there. Thank you.
So I'd like to point out how different this definition is from the one that the US News and World Report uses to rank schools.
Dr. Tung, could you please expound on your statement?
Well, I mean, so our task is to maintain rigor in the proposed policy. And when we talked about it you weren't there for the last 10 minutes of the last meeting, it was raised that maybe Ms. Garrett should say why you raised the US News and World Report, but my definition I've now said twice in meetings, and it looks more like this one, which has to do with our kids being challenged to use multiple learning styles, to collaborate, to think creatively. But I don't want to put words in Ms. Garrett's mouth.
No, I appreciate that, Dr. Tung. I agree that your definition is very aligned with what's here. I think when we talked about, and I welcome, members of the working group to chime in, because I don't want to speak for the whole group. I do think part of the statement, when it discussed maintaining rigor, was talking about the overall achievement of the school, as measured by how schools are generally tiered and or ranked by achievement. I know that the district has a holistic definition of rigor. I think I was more thinking about how schools are categorized as the level of intervention that they might need. And those indicators are more in sync with some of the absolute data points that I mentioned in the last meeting. So I think more thinking about overall achievement than the actual learning process was on my mind when the working group statement was read around kind of maintaining the rigor of the schools in terms of their absolute outcomes versus process. But I appreciate that and agree that your definition is aligned when it comes to process, though I do not know how the district is measuring those things as related to the overall way that the schools are ranked or tiered ultimately.
And to that point, again, this is something still being reviewed and processed with our academics office and our chief of schools. So it's just want to put that out there, and I think just to make that clear. Thanks.
So this is an important question, or to which we need to get an answer, because part of our charge explicitly refers to maintaining rigor. And so this is something that Mr. Contopasis and I will need to take to the school committee to ask them, what do they mean by rigor? Because if what I'm hearing is that the district may have one definition that is speaking to learning, to, I think as Ms. Garrett, you described it as the learning process. And there may be some who are thinking of it in terms of, how schools may be ranked on different national rankings or what have you. There's a gap. And in order for us to be able to perform our duty, we need to understand what the school committee intention is when they use that term rigor. Is it about maintaining, is it about the learning process? Or is it about, you know, school rankings and stature? So I guess that's something that we can take back to the school committee and then report back to the group on, so that we're all on the same page with what they're asking us to do. Ms. Garrett?
Thank you. That was well said, Ms. Sullivan. I do just want to be a little clearer in the way I was bucketing the two, that I wasn't referring to reputation or stature. I was referring to like student outcomes, student performance data, and not stature or rankings, but more measurable data points for which most high schools, public and otherwise, are measured. Graduation rates, college completion, college enrollment, college completion data, mass core, you know, those pieces, not on any stature.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lum?
I also would like, and maybe this is for the working group to help me grasp, but if rigor as applied to the learning process, to me, that is a question of curriculum and how it is taught in schools, over which I don't believe this working group has purview. So I would question how we are to anticipate rigor with that in mind.
Great, thank you. Mr. Contenpasis.
Following up on the district's definition, the question I would raise is, given that definition, then how are they measuring how the district actually reaches those outcomes? And that would be another question that I would raise. And it's perhaps why, as Ms. Roberts has stated, the district is probably rethinking that definition in light of the fact that it is establishing for the district as a whole a commitment to mass core standards, to graduation requirements. And that definition from the district is more driven by, to my way of thinking, how the district should at least offer multiple kinds of strategies to address what the district has indicated in its definition. But the key question here is, how does the district measure what it claims is their definition of rigor?
Ms. Roberts, you don't have to have a response, but if you do, I different. Okay.
I will bring that back again, just reminding you all that there's work happening. So
thank you. Mr. Acevedo.
Ms. Lum, just with reference to the question, and it's kind of something that we talked about a little bit on Friday, with respect to what are we doing concerned with rigor. Well, the golden answer to that is, you're right. We're not here re-engineering the mechanics of the curricula at BLS or the other exam schools. The reason why it's posed to us and why it's so prominent in our charge is implicit with that is we affect the climate of rigor at the city's elite schools by the way we select the student body. And those are loaded considerations. it's been posed to the exam school admissions task force because there's an implicit consideration that we are going to be selecting the student body that we select or that will be selected through these processes will either maintain or increase or denigrate the perception of rigor or the capacity for rigor at these exam schools. That's why that term is there.
I'm sorry, Mr. Acevedo, could you just expound on that? Just so that we make sure that we're all clear on kind of, I don't want to misinterpret what you're saying.
No worries, I won't miss words. On Friday, I shared that the word rigor is the most combustible word in our charge. And it means more for some folks, you know, it's an exclusionary term. And the reason why it's in our charge, you know, is there's just this, you know, there are some folks who are using, I don't believe anyone on this screen is using it this way. And I believe that when we think of rigor, you know, we think of the definition of rigor as BPS shared it today. There are others who are using that term to mean the perpetuation of a culture where when they think rigor, they're not thinking classrooms representing historically marginalized students and a culture that were typically associated with a rigorous education. And we just need to be mindful, when folks use that word rigor, that there are both of these terms, both of these implicit meanings of this term there. The reason why we've been asked, to come up with an admissions policy that is both protecting of the schools, rigor, and also much more inclusive, is that there's that implication that folks want to see a student body that is more diverse, but that does not dilute the exam school's capacity for rigor. And that's actually where the rubber, that's the third rail. The emotional and social and historically painful third rail.
So you're getting to structural racism and how it may be integrated into and used in this instance with respect to the term rigor?
I'm saying that we need to be vigilant of that, correct.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised at this time. Are there any? Okay. So Ms. Roberts and Ms. Hogan, do you have anything else for us tonight?
No, ma'am.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right. Well, it is that time again where we talk about solutions, ideas, thoughts. If we're ready, if there's been any evolution in our thinking since Friday, or if we're still, okay, Mr. Kreger, thank you.
I'm always ready on this one. Just first, greetings to everyone tonight. I guess what I wanted to do was two things. The first is some lawyerly housekeeping that I just want to flag for the group and see if it sticks, see if it's relevant to what we're trying to do. And the second is, is to talk out loud or think out loud about, what kind of process could we go through to compare the different models that have been presented to us from places like Chicago and Detroit, or things that have come up to us on our own, just in simply exploring the data that Monica Hogan and Monica Roberts have so fully provided us. So if you would indulge me in both, just briefly. Right? The first thing on the lawyerly housekeeping, we had just been talking about the need to bring to the school committee the question of what they mean around rigor in our charge. And I wanted to turn our attention to the charge itself, and specifically a language of better reflecting the racial, socioeconomic, and neighborhood diversity of Boston's K-12 population. And I do that because I want to contextualize what we're doing in light of this tremendous victory that our current admissions plan received in federal court. Okay. And this has been brought up to us before. We've got a great summary by Attorney Michael Keating. Samuel, you raised the point of what a thorough victory that First Circuit opinion was. And it really kind of opens some doors for us about what it is we can do to promote these different forms of diversity that we see in our city within our exam schools. At the same time, these opinions don't come without warnings. And I think it's important that we're mindful of all of these things as we proceed in this work. Right? And if I can be just a little more frank, right? I think for those of us who served on the working group, right, we watched all the work we put in from August through October get pulled apart and dissected in public view through the federal courts. And I think we had plenty of questions about, what does this mean for our work going forward? And can we even talk about what it is that we want to see in designing a plan for exam school admissions that would be more permanent than our one-year solution? And so these are the things that I want to hopefully say, so that we can have these conversations and we can be not afraid to talk about any of these issues with each other and publicly, being recorded live over Zoom. So the first thing is this: every time we are doing this work, I think we should expect that there is going to be a legal challenge that follows what we do. And to me, that means simply that we have to do our best as a committee to dot our I's, cross our T's, and really know the ground rules and the game board on which we're playing. Okay, and in this instance, the legal game board is really cornered in by an opinion called Parents Involved. It's one that we've talked about in the past. That was decided by a significantly now different court, where in 2007, not long ago, where while a majority of the justices felt that the desegregation or voluntary integration plans at work in Seattle and Louisville were unconstitutional, right? A separate majority of justices felt that there was a constitutional interest in promoting diversity. And our job on this task force is to figure out how to walk all these lines in a way that helps us meet our charge with never running afoul of the Constitution. Okay. And that case provides us a couple key roadmaps that I think we need to be mindful of. Right? The first is the Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court, John Roberts, was very clear in Parents Involved that while much of our cases about higher education and diversity don't apply to the K-12 context, he's not going to start looking at approving diversity in public schools without beginning that conversation around the educational benefits that flow from diversity, right? And those are benefits that thankfully our co-chair, Mike Contompassis, clearly articulated to the school committee in presenting our plan. One of the things that the court noticed in ruling that it was done constitutionally. So we know there are educational benefits to diversity, right? Benefits that matter in terms of being able to learn with and from students of a far different background than yours, right? And we also know that part of those benefits don't come when students' races are viewed as monoliths, where you have to speak for your entire race, where you are being judged as though you were the only representative of your entire race. And so our courts have recognized the need for a critical mass of students to avoid that kind of racial isolation, for without it, there is no educational benefit that flows from it, right? So we know that the court believes in this form of diversity. Similarly, thanks to Justice Kennedy, we also know that there's a value to diversity that he and a majority of justices with him saw in eliminating barriers to equal educational opportunities, right? And that we can be considerate of race and other factors, other demographic factors, where it feels like, or it looks like, there are unequal barriers that are separating students from the same opportunities that need to be addressed. Okay. And so if we have that in the back of our minds, right, our job is to figure out how to take the charge we have from the school committee and do it in a manner that promotes a racial, socioeconomic, and neighborhood diversity that furthers these educational benefits and eliminates these barriers to equal educational opportunity. What the Supreme Court in Parents Involved, and in any case, wants to avoid at all costs is the notion of racial balancing, right? The notion that there's a fixed mathematical ratio of Black students who are going to be at Boston Latin School or the O'Brien, of Asian American students who are going to be at BLA, or students with disabilities who are going to be at any of our schools, okay? This kind of balancing is unconstitutional, particularly in prior efforts like in Parents Involved to tie it to the specific racial characteristics of individual students. And that's one of the reasons why the plans in Parents Involved defeated, but the plan that we have in Boston was approved not just by the district court, but also by the Federal Court of Appeals, okay? So I want to note for the record that as we think about reaching back out to the school committee on this question of rigor, do we also want to talk to them about our charge, or do we simply need to take the time as a group to enumerate the reasons why it is our plan, whatever it becomes, fulfills these goals, provides the educational benefits of diversity, and helps us eliminate barriers along the lines of race, socioeconomic status, and neighborhood, okay? That's one thing, right? And then if you're gonna just ride with me for a little bit longer, the other piece that I wanna say in this pain in the butt lawyerly way is that, you know, our job is not just to plant and seed this garden, but to make sure that it gets tended to in a number of ways, okay? And what I mean there is, if we're doing this, and we're doing this in any way that we hope promotes any form of diversity that we've talked about, we need to be able to check that process. We need to be able to subject it to periodic review. And that's not only good policy, it's also good law. In the cases where courts have applied strict scrutiny to matters like this, they've wanted to know that you're looking under the hood every couple years to make sure that this is running right. And I would like to suggest that when we come up with a policy, whatever it looks like, whatever the plan is, that we have a very clear component for how we're going to do this. how we're going to measure, for example, if we adopt a test, how we measure the efficacy of the test. If we adopt a plan that includes grades, how we measure the efficacy of grades. And particularly, if we adopt a plan with the hope that it promotes racial, socioeconomic, or neighborhood diversity, I'd hope that we'd include school climate surveys or something that allow us to understand whether students feel like they're being made to speak for their entire race when they're in class, whether students feel racially ostracized in their schools, or whether students feel welcome in them, and whether they feel like they have a critical mass of their peers helping to make sure that happens, so that the educational benefits flow in all directions. So that's the housekeeping.
So, so Matt, I do want to pause there because that was, I just want to make sure that I'm capturing kind of what you wanted in terms of the takeaways. And I also want to make sure that others have a chance to weigh in this segment as well tonight.
Oh, yeah.
So, so what I have in terms of, and thank you so much for the overview, what I have with respect to your two primary takeaways. One, as we are asking the school committee about the rigor component, also perhaps reviewing with them the part of the charter where they make reference to diversity and making sure that that is indeed in alignment with what they are expecting us to review, or if they would like to provide further clarification on that aspect of the charge. And then the second point being specifically as it relates to whatever policy recommendation is made by this body, your recommendation, which you want to make, one of the things you want to make sure that we consider is including within that recommendation a periodic review of whatever that policy is. Are those the two primary actions?
Right? That number one, whether it's through clarification of the school committee or simply our own action,
okay,
we are clear that the work we are doing is not to racially balance the enrollments of schools in Boston Public Schools, right? In its exam schools. And if we need to ask the school committee to provide us that clarification now so that we can continue to do our work in this manner, perhaps we should, right? And the second piece is exactly what you said, that whatever plan we come up with, it's subject to periodic review that can incorporate the feedback of students as to their experiences on the basis of their race, neighborhood, and socioeconomic status.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Was there, before I ask if anyone else wants to contribute to this portion, was there anything else that you wanted to add, or were you?
I mean, you just listened to me run on for too long like attorneys do. So I'm going to stop there. But I will say, if we want to talk about potential models, I'm game. And I wonder if part of what gets us going is to just simply introduce one model that appeals to us and name a pro and or a con and or a question.
Yes.
Right? And ask our peers to do the same.
So that is what this section of each of our meetings is meant to do. And so to the extent that, folks have, ideas for what they would like to see in a policy, this is the time to do that, for everybody across the board. Ms. Lum, and then Mr. Acevedo. Oh, actually, I think Ms. Skerritt got up right before. I felt like Jeopardy there for a minute. Okay, Ms. Lum.
Thank you. So along the lines of moving the discussion forward, I wanted to get a sense from the working group with regards to the temporary policy. What could we use that as a benchmark to start with? It was, and get a sense of, we've heard from many in the public about what was less desirable about the outcomes, but I think we've also seen from the data provided that there were some historical gains in the outcomes as well. So is there an opportunity here to deconstruct the policy, to look at how we can make improvements where improvements need to be made, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, but maybe improving the wheel.
Thank you, Ms. Lum. Ms. Garrett?
Thank you. I agree with Ms. Lum that there's a lot to be learned from the one-year policy, but I might see it slightly different that we use that as a baseline for a policy because it was a policy that was created out of a crisis that prevented the full ability of any, we had to look at a different time period than we usually do for students. There was a significant portion of application that was not available. And so I feel really proud and honored to have worked with the working group on this policy and think that there was a lot of thoughtful work done, but I'm uncomfortable with it serving just personally as the starting point, being that it was created out of the unavailability of specific information that I think families have also voiced, even just on grades, the specific time period needing to go back so far. But I do agree with Ms. Lum that the point that I was originally going to make in considering models is related to something that we've seen, even looking at the data today, with very kind of hard limits by any by neighborhood category in terms of access. And my mind went back to something that Zoe asked a few weeks ago about considering applicants as individuals while still serving to those points that Mr. Kreger articulated in terms of needing to ensure that we have a learning environment that maximizes the economic, racial diversity of our city. And so I really would love to look at models such as Detroit, where applicants were able to apply as their own person, but with additional factors and considerations based on their specific status. And I specifically would love to look at the school type that a student attends, because as we've talked about some of the inequity in the past around things such as test prep and resources, they are often very much connected to the resources and the status of the school. So if we were to potentially look at some process where students were able to receive, as they do in Detroit, some level of points, et cetera, for a threshold that we decided based on school type, I think to Mr. Kreger's point, there would still be that socioeconomic diversity, especially if we're looking at percentage of economically disadvantaged students or something of that nature. I know Zoe had suggested, and I don't want to speak for you, Zoe, but I know you had suggested trying to get at people's individual income levels, which I think is very challenging based on the difficulty of people even submitting their own grades, never mind their tax returns. But I am very drawn to your point about how individual applicants would not simply be measured against folks within a specific tract or zip code, as we saw some instances in the data of neighborhoods with low socioeconomic status that were definitely adversely affected by the one-year policy.
Mr. Acevedo?
Mark, actually, I thought you did a great job to summarize that thinking in a very accessible way to non-lawyers. And precisely for that reason, I share Ms. Garrett's, both her pride in what we did this summer, but also I would be cautious about using the working groups, the product of the working groups recommendations as a baseline in addition to the reasons she shared. But one of the reasons, as I read the circuit court opinion, one of the reasons it passed those recommendations passed constitutional muster is because it was by definition limited in scope. The court was able to say, well, they're just doing this for a limited period of time, and it's not clear that that same policy would pass constitutional muster long term. I think more instructive would be, and just taking Mr. Gregory's advice, more instructive would be to look at communities that have enacted intentionally long-term policies that have also passed constitutional muster, and borrowing from that. If we know that Detroit's a long-term policy and they've all been tested constitutionally, and Chicago as well, just to be able to draw from those instructions, maybe their example would be more instructive, perhaps, for us as we try to develop a constitutionally defensible permanent policy of our own.
Ms. Grasso?
Thank you. Yes, I want to echo a little bit about what Ms. Garrett said, but I also really feel like the lingering question that is probably on the minds of everybody watching right now, and probably the regular question I have is, are we giving an exam or are we not giving an exam? And I think we just need to get to the point about that. I'm not saying like to skip a total process, but I do think we need to have a very real conversation about that. And I know that that is not going to be an easy conversation. And I know some people might say, well, if there's multiple factors or if there's not, but I do truly think that is the biggest question that's on the minds of so many people in the city of Boston right now regarding this task force, and we need to address it head on.
Thank you, Ms. Grasso. Ms. Lum?
Yes, thanks. I was going to ask the same question about whether a test was being administered. In addition, just as a point of clarification, I wasn't suggesting that the temporary policy be used as the foundation for our next policy, but more as a benchmark or a watermark to really understand what that policy affected, bad and good, and see how our new policy would address either sustaining outcomes we want to sustain or redress outcomes that weren't anticipated. So it was more along the lines of analysis. I also want to put on the table the opportunity, and again, I don't know what grading periods we're thinking of using for the ongoing policy, but I think it was either a testimonial or potentially one of the students who suggested using more than just math and ELA as a consideration. And I don't know how the working group or task force feels about that, but I would like to put that on the table.
Great. Any other comments or thoughts at this time? Ms. Garrett?
Just to piggyback on Ms. Grasso's point, and maybe it's 6:31 p.m. isn't the time to start if there are public comment today, but I am interested in returning to that part of the discussion around using an assessment. And I know that we are awaiting a response from NWA, and there may be some, considerations that certainly will be taken into account, but I would appreciate the opportunity to kind of have a sense from the members where we are with our thinking around assessments this time. But it could be another meeting, or
Yeah, I mean, I think that hopefully we will hear back from NWEA in short order. It's been 2 weeks. And so hopefully as a good partner, they will send us something. And so, I mean, I think that perhaps we can put that, at least the start of the conversation, on the agenda for Friday. if that makes sense for folks, knowing that it will likely be a long conversation.
Can I ask a question that maybe might, that we can add to that as we have the conversation about assessments? That I imagine there's a variety of perspectives on the in our group. I would love folks to, it would help me to also hear from folks what suggestions around an indicator to identify whether a student is relatively close to grade level, if not an assessment, might help us think about models. So I don't know if I've said that clearly. Is if for members who may not recommend an assessment as a component of the policy, is there another attainable data point from all applicants that could represent a student's performance at or near grade level before matriculating to the exam schools?
Great. I think Dr. Tang.
Well, in terms of grades, is a B average at grade level?
I think one thing that the working group discussed that we put into the charge for the school committee, and I don't believe it was a step that was taken, was that the grades have a huge level of subjectivity across school types, and that we were to ask whether it was school leaders or the districts or the sending schools themselves to verify that the class work represents on grade level work. For a variety of reasons, I can imagine that that was a step that may have been difficult, but in the absence of it not occurring, I'm very interested in that question going forward.
So I actually have a clarifying question. So Ms. Roberts, Ms. Hogan, was that done for this process? Because that was very much so part of the recommendation. Well, not the recommendation, that was very much so part of the policy that was approved by the school committee.
I can take that question. So the district did explicitly ask, what was in the policy is that the district would verify. And so for our non-public partners, we did ask those school districts, or in some cases, a charter school is considered a district, to verify. And on the district part, the district stance is that grades are expected to be reflective of grade level standards as laid out by the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks. And so if the grades that were submitted by schools are based on that expectation. And so that was the district's process.
So I'm sorry, that is not clear for me. So let me ask it a different way. The policy that was approved by the school committee had as one of the components that there would be a certification by the sending school that the B average, which is what got a child into the pool, was reflective of that student being at or above grade level. So did that happen for all students who were in the pool?
Not at the school level for BPS. And I think I do believe it said the district level, but I will check that.
Okay, yep.
And BPS did not ask every school to certify grades, no.
Okay, so BPS provided that certification as a district. Did every other sending school or sending school district do the same?
All non-BPS schools were required to submit a certification.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what Ms. Garrett is referring to is we did not as a district do it on a school-based level. And we expected our schools to follow our standards.
Right. Okay, that's a helpful clarification. Thank you. Dr. Tang.
Ms. Roberts answered my question.
Great. Before we go into public comment, the only question that I have at this time is one that I think I asked the working group this summer as we entered into our deliberations, and just to level set, are we recommending a policy that is designed to weed students out or to weed students in? Said another way, are we designing a policy that is intended to exclude, and I know it might sound harsh, but it just is what it is. Are we designing a policy that is intended to exclude students or to include students? For me, depending on the type of policy we are intending to design, it would inform the type of criteria that I might recommend be included in a policy. And so for me, it would be helpful to understand, again, for us as a task force, what our intention is, and to just be upfront about it, whatever that may be. So I look forward to that conversation as well. I also think it might be helpful for each of us, to the extent we have not done so. I know I need to do it, to speak for myself, to put pen to paper and, design a policy that we believe individually could be used in this instance, to be able to see, to one, help us all guide our own individual thinking, but then also give us something to work with when we come together as a group. So those are my two things. Otherwise, I think it looks like we're ready for public comment.
Thank you. We have 7 speakers this evening, and each speaker will have 2 minutes per person. Please state your name, affiliation, what neighborhood you are from before you begin. When I call your name, please raise your hand virtually in Zoom. Also, please make sure you're signed into Zoom with the same name you used to sign up for public comment. That will allow us to identify you when it's your turn to testify. I will move you up as a panelist, and we will ask you to turn on your camera for public comment. Our first speaker this evening is Travis Marshall, followed by Jane Zhu and Alan Tian. Travis Marshall, please raise your hand. You're muted.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, or good evening, I suppose. My name is Travis Marshall. I'm a parent of 2 BPS students in Rosendale. I was recently speaking with an older neighbor this is an anecdote, an older neighbor whose adult kids had attended a mix of BPS and parochial schools. And the topic of this year's admissions came up, and she mentioned the controversy over the changes. Her oldest, she told me, had years ago gone to parochial school with a new first-year teacher in 6th grade. She didn't know she was supposed to cook the books, my neighbor told me. The teacher didn't believe in giving out A+ grades, and therefore none of the 6th graders from her class were offered exam school seats that year, while a large number of their peers at a different parochial school were. It's always been a game, my neighbor remarked. And that's at the heart of this issue about exam schools. It is a game, and it's a game that some families have known how to play for decades. Test prep tutoring, pressure for grade inflation, and even the general awareness of how to navigate the system have given select families an advantage in this process. And that is why we now hear about how many seats Ascending School, quote, gained or lost this year, as if those historic numbers are somehow intrinsic to certain school communities. The truth is that those seats belong to no one. and they also belong to everyone. Whether a Boston family knows how to play the game or not should not factor into their child's chance. The claim by some that changing admissions would lead to lower school quality is wrong. Abundant research shows that racially and economically integrated schools have higher student engagement, civic participation, and sense of belonging. Now, it's true that BPS has much work to do to ensure all high school students have access to similar opportunities and resources, but that work is politically harder in an environment where if a few schools with the most opportunities disproportionately serve the students whose families know how to play the game. We can't return to the past. A test providing the mirage of meritocracy is not the way forward. And given the ubiquity of grade inflation, it's possible that GPA is not either. I urge you to continue in your work of refining and adapting a policy that ensures public schools that serve all of Boston's students. Thank you for your time. Good evening.
Thank you. Next speaker is Jane Zhu. And I want to remind all the speakers to please state your neighborhood and turn on your cameras. You're muted. Please unmute yourself.
Oh yeah, okay, yes.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Jian Zhou. I'm the mother of former Boston Latin student. I live in West Roxbury. And it's my first time to attend this kind of activities. And I learn a lot, I hear a lot. That's very helpful. And but I still thinking, then the Boston Latin, I really loved it so much because my daughter get help a lot from this school, and its oldest school in America is a prestigious public exam school and provides excellent and high quality education to the students. And why so many years it continue to be prestigious public school? Because and it's so successful, I believe two factors are attributed to this success. One is a good faculty. Boston Latin has, from principal to the teachers, I really truly appreciate for all of them for the passion delegation. But it's not enough to make a school successful. The second factor is equally important, sometimes more important, which is a good student. A good student has to take a school, very seriously and work hard. I hear your statistics shows, those economic disadvantage in area they're probably less prepared and compared with, better prepared. I'm thinking, like a kid, you run fast and maybe than others. Maybe he has, coach, he has better shoes, but definitely he's a hardworking kid. And other kids, he probably doesn't have a coach, doesn't have a good shoes, but he also less prepared. How are we going to help them? We do not pull that fast kids slow their pace. We also want to help the slow kids move fast. So that's the strategy we have to use, thinking about that going forward. And Boston Latin is, the latest news is showing as the best high school in Massachusetts. So I hope, let's work together, don't ruin it, maintain the school as a prestige and high quality standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Alan Tian.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity today to speak out. I live in West Roxbury. I have one 8th grader and one 5th grader. I just want to share some conversation last Sunday on the kitchen table with my daughter. We were just having regular Sunday dinner together. Suddenly, my 5th grade daughter asked me, "When will we move?" I asked why. Turned out to be her best friend in the class is moving out of Boston in summer because her classmate's elder sister didn't get to exam school invitation this year, and they are facing the same issue in the current for her classmate, which is 5th grader. Next year going to be her turn. I told my daughter, we cannot move. Your elder brother is in BPS. As long as you work hard, keep your excellent grade, you can go to school you want. No, my daughter answered. Even I keep excellent grade, I won't get into any good schools. Ellie is her classmate's, the elder sister, which is 6th grader this year. Ellie is the top one in the class. She got A- GPA. She didn't get into any exam schools. And my daughter asked, how about we move to another zip code in Boston? Ellie's classmates have much worse grade than her. I think the B or B- or something, and accept into BLS because he live in the zip code, different zip code. My daughter want to move to that zip code, then she can go to school she want. Then my son still can stay in the same school in BPS. So from the last work group conversation, the slide showed that 11 schools, 10 of them are BPS schools, with a decline of 10 seats. This had a significantly minimize the impact of these schools, as parents are reporting that they were declining 30 or 40 seats. So Clymer last year had 41 seats, but this year they only have 7 seats. So my daughter's value system now totally destroyed. She's a paranoid. Hard working is not a value anymore. I cannot ask her to do actual reading or actual exercise because that will be considered cheating or gaming the system. Kids don't want to go to AWC class anymore, and it will hurt your grade even more. Now all the kids just want to move to the right zip code or move out of Boston, period. And I cannot see that's not right. Pursuing equity is in the expense of justice, and excellence will pay a big price for our society. Please tell me how to teach my 11-year-old doctor in the future. I hope working group will not based on the new policy from the last year's plan as it's just for COVID necessities 1-year plan. If another year of zip code plan continue, here's going to happen to my doctor next year. No book from library, no actual book reading, no actual exercise, no AWC.
Mr.
So there's no way for her to cheat the system. We won't ask her grade, her homework. The only way.
Excuse me, Mr. Chen. Ms. Parvex is trying to get your attention.
Okay, I will finish right now. We moving to the right zip code will be the only rigor that means to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Stuart Wang. Stuart Wang. Please unmute yourself and start your camera.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so yeah, I would like to provide my thought and as a parent, and this is my first time here. I noticed that several friends' kids, all being top 20% students, they didn't get a seat this year due to the change in the admission policy. And now they are panicking and moving out to Boston. I have the value of trying my best to realize the American dream. I have gone through the tough time when I just entered into the US here, just like many first-generation immigrants. I didn't wait to complain. Instead, I studied hard day and night, also over the weekend. And the skills I learned has been used to help our society to fight the COVID disease now. I don't think my hard work and contribution to the society should be an excuse to punish my children just because they live in a specific zip code. The kids have done nothing wrong, and it's unfair and totally wrong to deprive of those talented kids of their opportunities just because parents choose to live in a specific zip code. So education is not a zero-sum game. The fact that some kids get ahead through discipline and hard work doesn't deny that opportunity to others who face the same choice. So by taking opportunities from kids because they are too successful is
20
a backward approach. So I know you have done excellent work and try to come up with a solution. However, we cannot promote equity by lowering the standard. We cannot exclude top students using the terminology either rigor or equity. So given the many issues observed with last year's policy change due to pandemic, I propose we go back to our original administration policy. Yeah, just 10 seconds. We need to, so that way, because the pandemic is almost close, under control, so we need to go back. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Next speaker is Stuart Yang. Please raise your hand. Please turn on your camera and unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. So I believe everybody recently heard this news that Kobe Bryant was voted to the Fame Basketball Hall of Fame, right? So I believe everybody knows Kobe Bryant, okay? He's like 18 times All-Star and NBA most valuable player. So why the Kobe Bryant get so much reputation in the basketball field? Because I believe this because of his exciting performance, and not because he lives in a specific zip code. So Kobe Bryant was he's very worked very hard. When he was in the high school, he started to practice at 5 a.m. in the morning and left for school at 7 a.m. So every day practice 2 hours. And when most people are still in the dream, okay? So, and also Kobe Bryant has a very successful and famous father, that's Joe Bryant. So that's Kobe Bryant's
20 seconds.
Does Kobe Bryant's achievement is affected by his father's success? Definitely not, okay? So is it legal to work hard to pursue your own dream? Is it legal for the parents to pay attention, pay input a lot to help their kids to grow up? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Rachel Meiselman.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hello. Please turn on your
Okay.
camera. Yes.
How's that? Good?
Thank you.
Okay. So, good evening. My name is Rachel Meiselman. I wish to articulate my concerns over the implementation of the zip code quota plan, a one-year COVID-related plan. The increase in diversity in the Boston exam school populations has been roundly touted as positive, not only in regard to race, but also EL learners and those that are socioeconomically disadvantaged. I would like to speak to the practicality of the plan, however. There has been an increase in English language EL learners from what are referred to as the 3rd and 4th levels. Students may possess a strong level in English, particularly in the 4th level, but they lack fluency. Given that the EL curriculum has been criticized for not enabling students to become fully fluent, could you discuss supports that would assist students with language acquisition? Moreover, how would this square with the rigorous curriculum that is in place? Next, I've heard different terms related to socioeconomics. I have heard the term economically disadvantaged. Ms. Sullivan, I've heard you use the term housing fragile, something along those lines. And so what I want to know is what exactly are the terms that are being used relative to those that maybe have less in terms of socioeconomic resources, and what are the criteria in place? What do you use to determine who is in fact disadvantaged in that respect? And I would of course want to know what support
20 seconds.
that you have in place for that, because we obviously want all our students to thrive. Finally, I must come back to this. What are you doing to fix the feeder schools? According to the state audit last year, 16,656 students are attending schools ranked in the bottom 10% of the state. There are two schools on methadone mile. Again, what are you doing to fix the feeder schools? There's a lot of talk about ensuring that no student feels isolated, but what are we doing to make sure that all students are educated? And I lastly want to address the point about privilege, because that word is being flung around a lot. This is not a debate about privilege in regard to the admissions policy of the exam schools. This is about merit. This is merit and hard work. And we want to send out a message to our children that if they work hard, they can get someplace. And to send out a message
Excuse me, Ms. Meiselman, I'm sorry.
contradicts that.
Ms. Parvex is trying to get your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. I'm finished.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Last speaker is Sarah Granfield. Please unmute and start your video. Thank you.
Here I go. Start video. Good evening. So I'll jump right in by adding my voice to the chorus of public commenters who have expressed frustration with the timing and manner in which BPS has released information about 2021 admissions. Even after tonight's presentation, we still have not seen the GPA cutoffs for each individual exam school, both by sending school and by zip code. Another recent example of the way that BPS has been disingenuous in the provision of data is the chart from Friday's presentation, showing which schools earned quote unquote 10 or more fewer seats over last year. My understanding is that some BPS schools, for example, the Quincy and the Kilmer schools, each received somewhere between 30 and 40 fewer invitations than they did last year. So a category of 10 or more is misleading if the real number is 40. So let's just see the raw data for all sending schools for recent years without the spin. I would also like to convey some concerns about the composition of the task force. I intend no disrespect to the serving members, but it remains a mystery to many of us as to how and why this particular group was selected and why certain categories of stakeholders and areas of professional expertise are not represented. As we've already seen this year, any decision about the exam school admission policy is a critical one that will profoundly affect families throughout the city. It needs a full and fair democratic process that ensures that every engaged stakeholder feels their voice is being heard by decision makers who are actually accountable to the residents of Boston. For that reason, I urge the task force to hold off on making any final recommendations until after this fall's elections. It simply does not seem feasible, given all that we have seen and heard, and frankly, all that we have
20
not
seconds.
yet seen and not yet heard, that the task force could come to a well-designed recommendation by the end of this month. But anything less would be a terrible disservice. Similarly, I would hope that you recommend that the school committee hold off on any final decision until after the elections. This issue is too important to be left solely in the hands of a small number of unelected officials. I note that Judge Young cited the significance of the upcoming mayoral election in his opinion, as well as
Your
the
2
need
minutes are up.
for democratic decision-making on this issue. Bostonians who care about our students and schools deserve to know where our mayor and city councilors stand and deserve a chance to voice their opinions at the ballot box. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Sullivan, Mr. Contempassis, that concludes our speakers for public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Contempassis.
Is there anything further that we need to discuss? I think we're set for Friday. We are going to have a speaker, and Dr. Tung, are we all confirmed?
Yes.
Good. And after the speaker, we will continue our discussion around some of the topics that were raised today. So if there's nothing further, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. May I have a motion, please?
Yes, please.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Second.
Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Hearing none, Ms. Parvex, will you please call the roll?
Thank you. Mr. Acevedo,
Aye.
Mr. Kreger, Ms. Grassa,
Aye.
Ms. Lam,
Aye.
Ms. Nagasawa,
Aye.
Ms. Garrett,
Aye.
Dr. Tung,
Aye.
Ms. Wade,
Aye.
Ms. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mr. Contempassis.
Yes,
That's unanimous. Thank you.
meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. We'll see you all on Friday.